has a lot of great horror films up right now, and today I'm really excited to share with you my top favorites. Andy here. If you are new, I am a horror writer. You can check out a few of my horror stories linked down below, and I'm also just a girl who loves horror. So today I wanted to recommend to you my top favorite movies that are on HBO Max right now. HBO Max has a lot of variety of horror films, and it's probably one of the first places I go to check. So today I'm going to give you my top 5, some recommendations, and then some classics. So my top 5 will go from 5 to 1, so I'll save the best for last. And I gave a lot of variety, so if there's something in here that you roll your eyes at or that you hate, hopefully you can still, stick around and find something that you do enjoy. There's a lot going on here, so let's just get into it. The first film that I want to recommend today is Vampire. This is a 1932 film, and this film just blew me away, to be honest. I mean, it's so unique, it's so original. The way that they use light and shadow is just fantastic. I mean, this movie is so interesting. I also thought it was interesting because this film, the original copy was lost, so the German, English, and French version, I think, were all put together. So that's why, for example, you'll see someone speaking in German, but then you'll see English text. So I thought that was really interesting too, so that they were able to save it. But if you really love to see films where horror began, I highly recommend this one. It's really just an awesome vampire story. But this one is just so special, and I highly, highly recommend this one. Next up, I recommend the movie Eyes Without a Face. This is a French horror film, so it does have subtitles, so if that bothers you, maybe skip out on this one. But this movie is just fantastic. It's a movie about a man who gets in a car accident with his daughter, and her face kind of gets obliterated. So he goes on a mission to kidnap and murder girls in order to steal their faces and kind of do a face transplant onto his daughter. It's a pretty unique original movie, and it really is dark and eerie without showing too much. There are a few scenes where you're like, how did they do this? Because it's an older horror film and the practical effects are pretty badass, but a lot of it is just eerie without really showing much, and I think that that's what makes this movie so special. It's so cool. You guys have to check this one out if you haven't seen it. I think most people would like this one. Next up, we have Eraserhead. Now, this is a David Lynch film and a movie that not everybody will like. This is a 77 horror / indie film, and at the base, at the root of the movie, it's about a man who's trying to become a father for the first time. So it's like his fear of fatherhood, realizing that his whole life is kind of put on hold to raise a child. The child ends up being severely deformed, the mother leaves, and he's kind of stuck on his own. So that's what the core film is about. However, I cannot pretend like I understand the whole film. In fact, David Lynch himself has said that each interpretation of the film that he has seen is different than his own, meaning that probably nobody really knows what the film's fully about, which I find just fascinating in itself. There's so much to analyze, but it's weird. I'm not gonna lie. There's a woman that lives in his radiator. There's these like sperm-like creatures that show up every so often. It's a weird, odd, strange, beautiful film. So if you don't like weird films, if you don't like feeling uncomfortable, if you don't like not knowing what's going on, you're gonna hate this and just don't watch it. But for those of you who do like more experimental films, it's a very surreal experience. You guys will definitely love this one. It's fantastic. I've seen it quite a number of times. I watched it in high school and just absolutely fell in love with it. For me, like, this is a horror film. Like, this is nightmare evoking, and it deals with real issues, and I just think it's fantastic. Next up, I'm going to recommend Dr. Sleep. If you guys have been around for a while, you know I did an entire video on Dr. Sleep about how much I just loved this movie, and I know that some people didn't like it, but hear me out for a second. So the reason I loved it is I saw it really as like a love letter to Stephen King. It really does give him the ending that he's waited for like 30 years. It's a beautiful film, and I think that Mike Flanagan in general is just such a great influence in horror. Like, you can see his love for horror through his films, and that's not something you can easily say about a lot of horror directors nowadays, but he, decides to take on challenging different, unique roles as opposed to just, you know, making another horror remake, and I really respect him for that. It's the second movie to The Shining, if you didn't know. Through his adult life, he's kind of repressed his Shining, avoided his past, locked it up in a box, and is trying to move on, but through his addictions and alcoholism, he's realized that he really needs to just confront his past, and he ends up meeting a young girl who has the Shining, and there ends up being a band of people who kind of go around and find people who shine and suck the life force out of them so that they can continue on living. Danny helps her try to get away from this group of, I don't know what they are, but I will say that if you haven't read The Shining and you haven't read Dr. Sleep, I can see why some people would maybe miss out on the message of this movie. I highly recommend you guys read The Shining and Dr. Sleep. For me, it was a really big shame that a lot of people didn't fully grasp his concept, what he was going for, and you know, it was a really big shame that the movie didn't do as well as it should have, because he killed it on this. Truly, he killed it. And the first movie that I want to recommend to you today is Alien. This movie is just fantastic. I mean, truly, the set design in this movie, it's mind-blowing. Movies today don't have set design like this. So this, if you don't know, it's a movie about a ship who has heard a signal from a nearby planet, has gone there, they've checked it out, everyone's dead, they come back. However, they've brought a little friend along who wants to jump out of somebody's chest, the famous alien scene, and take over the ship. This movie is awesome. The set design is fantastic. It's creepy, it's fun, it holds up. It's one of those movies that I still watch and I'm like, how is this so good? So I'm gonna go ahead and go out on a limb here and say that Alien is maybe one of the best horror films ever made. Yeah, it's one of the best horror films ever made. So those are my top 5. Now let's get into just my recommendations. Some of these I think are really great. Some of these are not my favorite movies in the world. This is just kind of a mixture of everything. But here we have our more probably traditional horror films. Oh, and before I get into the next part, feel free to subscribe. It doesn't cost anything. Except your soul. Ha ha. Too much? So first I want to recommend Dreamcatcher. This is another movie based off of a Stephen King film. It's about these aliens that take over people's bodies. It gets really brutal and really intense, and some of the scenes are just gory and fun. I really do love this movie. No, it's not my favorite, and I don't absolutely love the ending, but the first, I think 3/4 of the movie are just really fun. So I do recommend this one. Next up, I want to recommend Death Becomes Her. So this movie I talked about in my favorite dark comedies video, so I'll link that down below if you guys are interested in watching that. But this movie is a dark comedy, but it is in the horror section, so I'm going to recommend it to you here. It's a movie about Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn. They are women that are very much so in are very much so in competition with each other. They kind of are impacted by each other's success, but also societal pressures to stay young and beautiful. They end up taking an elixir that will allow them to live forever. However, they must take care of their bodies. Well, both women end up dying very quickly. And although the movie is just, I mean, this movie is fantastic. If you haven't seen it, you have to watch it. It's also just a film that has good meaning behind it. I just love horror films that are equal parts bloody and disgusting, but then also have like a good meaning, a good moral behind it. And this one is really just like, you only get one life, you don't really want to live forever. Do with your life what you want. We only got this one shot, you know? So I just love this film so much. It's fantastic. You gotta check it out. The next movie I want to recommend is Devil. This is about a group of people who get stuck in an elevator. They die off one by one, and they're trying to figure out what kind of spirit is doing it. And it's an interesting film. For me, I think I really enjoyed the uniqueness of it. It's by no means my favorite film in the world, but I do find it entertaining, and I do suggest it. I think it's an interesting film, and I go back and watch it from time to time. Next up I want to recommend is the movie Gothica. So this one stars Halle Berry. She works at a mental health facility, and she ends up waking up as a patient in the mental health facility, being told that she has murdered her husband. She feels like she was possessed by some sort of ghost that had taken over her body and done this, and then the whole story unravels from there. I don't want to give too much away, but this movie is just creepy. It's fun. You know, there's a scene where the woman like walks, whatever that was. That scene really creeps me out. There are quite a few scenes that really do creep me out in this film. I just think it's unique, it's fun, and I think it's a great horror film. Next up, I have The Hills Have Eyes. So this is the 2006 remake. There is an original version of this, however, they are pretty much the same. There's a lot of scene by scene similarities and a lot of dialogue similarities and things like that. However, I just really prefer the remake, to be completely honest. I think it's one of the best remakes. It's very bloody, very gory, and it also has just like this full character transformation that I just love. And also just showcases humans' ability for survival, you know, that they just need to protect their family and survive. And it's just, I think, a fantastic, fantastic film. So it's about a family who pisses off somebody that they're asking directions for. He ends up sending them a different route. And in this route, there are people who have ran off into the caves because the government was testing bombs, and they've become kind of like mutant monsters that are living on old bomb testing sites who kill anybody who comes their way, and they kind of blame everyone for what they've become. I really, really enjoy this film. Next up, I have The Hitcher. This is an 86 film. It's about young boy who picks up a hitchhiker, and the hitchhiker, he's a killer, but he lets him go, but then murders a bunch of people, does a bunch of crimes, and kind of blames it on the young man. So this movie is by no means my favorite movie in the world. However, the relationship between the killer and the young boy is just so interesting, and it borders on sexual at some points. It's such an interesting relationship, and even the end scene, you really get to see like how strongly these two are bonded. It's a really interesting film. It's one that you kind of just throw on in the background with your friends and, you know, watch it, because a little bit of it is pretty ridiculous and like, okay, but it's a fun film nonetheless, and one that I would recommend if you haven't seen it to check out before, or if you haven't seen it before, to check out now. Next up, I'm going to recommend The Thing. This is actually the remake of The Thing as well. Does it touch the original? Absolutely not. However, the practical effects in this movie are just fantastic, and I think it's worth watching just for that. No, it doesn't touch the original, but it's definitely one worth checking out for sure. And then after that, we're heading on to classics. I don't think I have to explain these too much, but we have the 81 An American Werewolf in London. This one's about American werewolves in London. It's about Americans who go to London and get attacked by a werewolf. Fantastic practical effects in this one too. I think this one won like a ton of awards for practical effects. An amazing movie, definitely one to check out if you haven't. The Blob, this is another classic you guys have got to see if you love traditional horror films. And next up we have Child's Play 2 and 3. Both of these are actually on HBO Max. Jaws 1 through 4 you can also check out. The Mummy, this is actually a 59 movie, so one of those older films too, where you can kind of see where the horror genre began. And of course, the 68 movie, Night of the Living Dead. Just your traditional, fantastic George A. Romero zombie film. So those are my recommendations for horror films on HBO Max. I do have a recent video that I did for my favorite horror movies on Hulu. If you guys want to check that out, I will link that down below as well. So also on my channel, I have just a bunch of horror videos about books, films, comparing them, all sorts of stuff. So if you guys are interested in anything horror, feel free to subscribe if you guys want. Give this video a thumbs up if you found something to watch. And other than that, I think that's it. So I will see you tomorrow with yet another horror video. I hope you guys are having a fantastic October so far, and Halloween is just a few days away. So keep watching those scary movies. I'll see you guys soon. Bye guys.